Hi everyone, it's Brenda Miller from the ABQ Sewing Studio in beautiful Strathroy, Ontario. But today you are joining me in my home studio, and I am taking some time today to show you a few different things. This is a video aimed at beginners, but there are a couple of interesting little hacks enclosed in the video as well that you might want to stay tuned and watch. So we're going to talk about fabric preparation to start with. Tearing versus cutting for when you get your fabric at the fabric store, how to straighten the fabric that is not got its fold in the right place on the bolt or it's off grain. Then we're going to talk about two ways to cut strips, and you know, strips are used for practically everything. Two different techniques, and you might not have seen the second one, and it's pretty interesting, so stay tuned for that. And then we're going to show you a sewing hack for cutting and trimming half square triangles. So if you like what you see, like and subscribe, and I will put timestamps at the bottom of the video so that you can skip to the meaty parts if you want to do that. So join me as we look at fabric preparation and strip cutting. Let's talk about fabric and cutting fabric and preparing it for cutting. So fabrics can be off grain, or they might just have been wrapped on the bolt unevenly. Many off-grain fabrics can be straightened again. So when you buy fabric, it will have been either cut or torn at the shop where you purchased it. So on this side we have a torn edge, on this side we have a cut edge. Now, you may think that since this fabric was cut on the one end, I'm just showing this for demonstration purposes, at a 90-degree angle to the salvages, that this line will be on grain, but that's not necessarily so. So to find grain, you have got to tear your fabric like we did on this side, and it tears along one thread line that goes across the fabric, and then you know that is your crossways grain. Now, if you've never torn fabric before, you might be a little leery of doing this, but let's just do it on this cut side. So you're going to just take a snip on the edge of the salvage, and you're going to tear across, and that's going to give us a strip of fabric. Now you will notice, you know, I thought I had cut this straight, but look at the difference from one end to the other. That's pretty considerable, right? Now, if your fabric is off up to 3/8 of an inch, like, you don't really have to worry about straightening it too much, but if it's more than that, you should. So once you've got your fabric torn on both sides, you're going to line up the salvage edges, as I've done here. There we go. And we're just going to flip it over and see if it seems to be pretty good. And it actually does. All right, so everything's lining up here. This little tab I have here on the end is just a little piece that I didn't cut off. And everything seems fine, but we want to check how it lays against the fold. And the fold that it came off the bolt on is here, but you'll see there's a little fullness here. So what I want to do is actually repress my fold. I might pin my edges just to keep them in place, especially if I'm using a longer piece of fabric. And then I will re-iron my fold. So I've got my salvage edges meeting. Then I'll just pull my ironing board here over. I'm going to smooth my fabric. And repress. Fold line. And you're going to be working on a larger ironing board, so it's going to be a little bit easier for you to see where you need to iron. But anyway, that seems pretty good now. However, one thing you have to keep in mind is that, let me flip this over, on this edge, what can happen is when you tear, you get some streaking where the tear is. So, see that? What's happened is some of these threads have actually turned over and the white of the back of the fabric is starting to show at the front. And it also has a bit of a curl. So you want to trim this off before you begin cutting strips. And because you're going to be doing that, you should always just purchase just a little bit more fabric. Now if you've bought, that's not quite right there either. If you bought fabric at the shop and they have cut the fabric, I mean it can be out 3 inches, 4 inches when it's cut. So you have to be very careful about that. And it's always a good idea to buy just a little bit extra for wiggle room, because if you think it's off grain, you're going to need to straighten it. Now, to straighten fabric that's off grain, what you need to do is relax the sizing on the fabric itself. So you would take, and you would go through this process here where it's cut and it's just not laying properly. So you would spray the whole thing with water, and then you would press it to get it to lay flat and press that fold again. Some folks think that by stretching the fabric on the bias, that will solve the problem, but it really doesn't, because that sizing will just pull it back. I mean, it might help a little bit, but not very much. So if you really need to straighten the grain of your fabric, that is doable, unless it's like a very kind of, I would call it like a thick, crunchy fabric, like a cheaper fabric. They just won't straighten. So you want to work with good quality fabric, and that is a means of straightening it out. So what happens if you have cut and things are not on grain? Well, in the small pieces that are used for piecing blocks, it's not a major problem. But once you get into strips that you're using or borders, these can look quite twisted in your finished product. So it's important to straighten your fabric, especially if you're going to be cutting long pieces or larger pieces. So how do you cut strips? Well, first of all, you want to make sure that you have the right tools. You need a decent cutting board that's in good condition. You need a rotary cutter that's sharp. Here I have one that is not sharp. And I want you to listen to the cut I make with this rotary cutter and see what happens. So let's just do a quick cut and listen carefully to the sound it makes. I'm really having to press hard. And look, we've got threads that are not cut all through this piece. And that's because this blade has a damaged area, and every time it turns to that area, it fails to cut the threads. So if you had to cut a whole pile of strips, you can see how frustrating this would be. So it's important to change the blade on your rotary cutter whenever this happens. Oops. You can also buy sharpening tools for blades, so long as you haven't run over a pin. They will sharpen up. Now, you've got to be extra careful with these blades because they are super sharp even when they're dull. So I have a little case here that I keep them in, and it says needs sharpening on the outside. And I will save those until I get my sharpener out again. So when you replace a blade, I'll handle the edge of it. There's 2 in this pack. One back. I'm going to lay it on my rotary cutter and replace that cover. There's a blade cover there. Do you see that? Flip it over and put it back together just the way I took it apart. I almost lost my little washer here. Now the washers, I should say, have flat edge and a rounded edge, and you want to make sure that it goes on your rotary cutter flat side to flat side. And I've got the curl of it going up, and then my final little part here. Okay, there we go. I'm going to put everything away so that there are no accidents. So how do you cut a strip? There are two schools of thought here. So most commonly you will have the fold at the front or the top of your cutting board. You will line it up on a grid line. You will place one of the inch lines of your ruler along the fold line. You will place your pinky here on the ruler, and you will start your cut. See how quiet that is now? And you will move your pinky up because it's kind of holding things in place here, right on the fabric side. And up you go and shut your blade, and it's trimmed. Now, this is just the trimming stage, so you want a nice clean edge. And in this method, what you'll do is you'll actually flip the fabric over, place it on a grid line on your mat again, place the cut side also on a grid line of your mat, and then you can start cutting strips. Okay? So, place my ruler on the fold. I'm just going to move that over just a little bit. I like to use the grid lines of the mat because it just assures me that everything's staying square. And again, I'm going to put my pinky here, just right at the edge. I'm going to start my cut and move my hand up. Because what will happen if I don't do that is the ruler will slither over a little bit, and the cut at the end will be a little bit narrower, which is not what I want. And when I take a strip, I pull it off on this side, I don't move the fabric because then I'll have to line it all up again. Now, it's important to have a nice big mat, at least 24 inches wide, if you can, because otherwise, if you're using a smaller mat, you're going to have to fold your fabric up and cut it because your mat's too small. And then with every fold line, you might get a little bit of a little wave in it from the cutting because it might not lay quite flat, and you know, that's not very nice either. Now, so that's the first method. You trim the fabric, as I said, on the right-hand side and cut from the left. Now, if you're left-handed, you're going to do it, you know, vice versa. You're going to trim on this side, cut on that side. So I think you could figure that out. If you're left-handed, you've been doing that all your life. Now, the other way that we like to show for cutting is a little bit different. We take our fold and we put it on the bottom of the cut. I'm just going to move this up so you can see, and place it on a grid line. And instead of trimming it on the right-hand side, we're going to do everything from the left-hand side. So you need, excuse me, a 12-inch ruler. And you place your 12-inch ruler on the fold line at the bottom. And I think I'll just move that over a little bit. So let's move this rough edge over there, because that really does need to be trimmed. The other side's already trimmed. So here we are. We've laid our fabric fold at the bottom. We've got our 12-inch by 6-inch ruler here. We're laying it so it's even with the fold line. What we're doing here now is we're making basically a T-square. So I'm lining it, the edge of this ruler up to that ruler. This one's square. So that means this edge is square as well. And when I cut here, it's going to trim it, and I won't have to flip the fabric over, which saves me a step. So all you need is an extra ruler to do this. So I'll go over that one more time. You lay the shorter ruler down on the fold line. You lay the longer ruler butting it against the shorter ruler, and then you move this ruler, and then you do your trimming, moving your pinky as you go along. Okay? And then you can start cutting your 2.5 inch strips or borders or whatever it is you need to cut, making it a little bit easier. So this is the way we teach our beginners how to cut. So let's cut some 4-inch strips using our beginner method. Make sure you can see. Here's our shorter ruler. We're going to lay that down and place the longer ruler, butting it up. Okay. And now I can cut 4-inch strips is what I'm after. So we're going to turn these into squares in a minute. So I'm lining up the edge of my ruler on the fold line, which is at the bottom, and I'm checking along the length to make sure that's 4 inches. I'm placing my pinky here so nothing shifts, and I move it along as I create the cut. Okay. Put this aside, and here's our strip. Now I want to remove the selvage edge of the fabric, and it might be printed to the edge, but it shrinks at a different rate than the rest of your fabric, so it needs to be taken off. And I can use that same method so I don't have to flip my piece over to trim it. Otherwise I'd be trimming on the left, moving the strip over, etc., etc. So I take a little bit off there. And now I'm going to use probably my shorter ruler to cut 4-inch squares. So line up my, let me just turn it this way for you. Line up my 4 inches, 4 and 4. And I always use that pinky there. And so on. Now, let's say you have to work with a really, really large piece of fabric. You have to cut something massive. You can use your cutting board to help you cut that out. So let's just pretend this is a large piece, and I use my cutting board to figure out where the 4 inches are. I just line up these edges here nice and even, 1, 2, 3, 4, and line up my ruler to the 4-inch line. And there I go. This is a method to use for large pieces though, because it may not be as accurate as using a ruler for small pieces. So I encourage you to always use your ruler for smaller pieces. So now we have some squares. Perfect little 4-inch squares. And I'm going to make these into half square triangles. So we only need a couple of these. We're going to put them right sides together. And I will draw a line, grab a marker, on my fabric. It doesn't really matter which side of the which fabric I choose, so long as it's on the wrong side. And I've drawn a little green line there. Hopefully you can see that. And I would stitch 1/4 inch to either side of that line. So let me do that and I'll be right back. Alright, so I have sewn 1/4 inch to either side of the line that I drew, and now I'm going to cut this in half to make 2 half square triangles. And there we are. And I will just press those. Okay, so I've got these 2 half square triangle squares that I've done here, and let's say I need to trim these to a certain size, and that size happens to be 3 3/4 inches square. Okay, so how do we do this? There's a couple of ways. I'll show you a little trick, but what you want to do is find the 45-degree angle on your ruler and place it on that center line where the 2 triangles meet. and I know I need 3 1/4, and if I trim on the right and on the top with the line right dead center, then I'm going to have enough, and I'm going to trim those 2 sides, shutting my blade. Okay, so they're nice and square. Now I have to turn this all the way around so that my corner that I just did is now on the bottom. And I find my 3 1/4 inches mark on both sides of my ruler. And then I can trim off the remainder here to give me a perfect 3 1/4 inch square patch. It's great, eh? Here's my little trick though. Sometimes it can be hard to see that line, and if you're doing like a lot of these, it gets a little bit tedious. So what I suggest is you find yourself some masking tape and just stick, I don't know, about 4 strips together. Place it on that diagonal line of your ruler, and you can just cut off the excess. And dispose of that. Okay. So now we've got a kind of a little ledge at the back of my ruler, okay? And I can place that ledge on the lower side of the fabric. So I've pressed it towards the black. I can put that little ledge right there, and it sort of snugs in, and I can slide it down, and I can trim. So we've trimmed that one side. Now here's the tricky bit. Instead of turning the whole thing around like we did before, we're going to flip it to that corner, because we want this ledge on our tape to slide along that seam line. So now we can look at our 3 1/4 here and here and trim that away. And oops, I just missed a little bit of a corner there. And there we go. So I'm going to do that one more time. This is a little different. So we've got our heavier edge here, and this is our less thick area here on the pink. And I keep moving that around. I place that on top, and it fits in that seam there. And I'll just trim a little bit off. Okay, and then I'm going to just turn it like that. And then we've got the higher part here and the lower part here. So my tape will fit in there. And we just slide it down. And that is a fun little sewing hack that will save you buying an extra ruler. And you'll get nice, perfect half square triangles.